Past the hills and rivers wide, where wildflowers freely bloom. In this land with skies so open, where can our children play? In cities bustling bright and loud, cars and lights that never sleep, do they find a piece of sky? Where can our children play? Bring them fields of green and gold, let their laughter echo clear. In a world so tightly wound, where can our children play? Mountains whisper ancient tales, forests sing in harmony. Will these wonders slip away? Where can our children play? Beyond the screens and towers tall, where dreams once were born and bred, do they carve new paths of joy? Where can our children play? Let's be stewards of this earth, guard the spaces wide and free. Do they find a piece of sky? Where can our children play? Bring them fields of green and gold, let their laughter echo clear. In a world so tightly wound, where can our children play? Bring them fields of green and gold, let their laughter echo clear. In a world so tightly wound, where can our children play?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Laurie Gagan, and I am the founder of StopSprayingGlyphosate.com. Today, I have the honor of introducing to you Dr. Richard Fleming. Dr. Richard Fleming is the author of Is COVID-19 a Bioweapon? Dr. Fleming is one of few MDs, JDs, physicist in nuclear cardiology. He is a dear friend who actually has been educating me on how SARS-CoV-2, the virus, can be a toxin and wreak havoc on our immune system. So again, I'm quite honored today to be interviewing him. So let me introduce Dr. Richard Fleming. Good afternoon, Dr. Fleming. It's my pleasure again to be interviewing you. And I always appreciate your generous time on getting the truth out to the public on lots of things that we are talking about right now. But you're so generous of your time, and I really, truly appreciate it, because I don't think that there's enough doctors talking about the truth. So thank you again for your time today. But I'm actually really excited to talk about nitric oxide today. And the reason I'm interested in talking about nitric oxide is that there's so many supplements out there that are touting that they may have the answer to what you patented, which is inflammothrombotic disease. Some of it we're seeing from the COVID shots, some of it we're just seeing from unhealthy people in general. So with that said, I've come up with a list of some questions that I think that our listeners, are excited to listen to. And at the end, because nitric oxide is so the rage right now, there's a lot of medical doctors, a lot of Navy doctors with these pilots that have been vaccine damaged. It'll be interesting to know what your spin is and how you would go about working with someone with inflammothrombotic disease.
Sure.
So let me just ask you the first question. It's something that I've asked you about before, but can you explain to our listeners in a way that they can understand what is inflammothrombotic response disease?
So, it's inflammothrombotic response to the body dealing with something that's coming into it. And there's a variety of mechanisms as the name implies. And there's two components that really are not separated from each other. The first one is the inflammation that everybody likes to talk about. Well, inflammation is typically thought of as redness and swelling and that type of thing, is the result of certain chemicals being released. When the body's immune system recognizes something that is causing harm to the body, that's almost always something that shouldn't be in the body, but it can be something that comes in the body in excess amounts. And this is where we talk about diets and lifestyles and that type of thing. But those chemicals are just the first pathway of trying to kill anything that shouldn't be in your body. And typically, the goal is to kill the cells of your body that have taken up these toxins, as that's a term that you like to use, I know. But anything that is harmful to the body, so whether it's a virus or whether it's excess fats or calories, or whether it's carbon monoxide, or you name it, gas, solid, liquid, it doesn't matter. Your body reacts to it and then tries to kill those cells. But the very process of starting to kill those cells also activates a clotting pathway. And it's designed to do two things. One, to keep in check so that something that's in the body that shouldn't be there can't spread. It's locked in place. And number two, it also prevents whatever that is from getting nourished. So it blocks blood flow, it blocks nutrients, it blocks oxygen, it blocks insulin, if in the case of some cancers, it prevents anything that could help the offending agent or organism or toxin or whatever you're dealing with from thriving. And it doesn't really matter what the substance is. Your body really has one way of doing it. When people have what's typically referred to as a heart attack, what I always call a myocardial infarction. So myocardium, heart, infarction, death. When that happens, it's because there's a blood clot that occurs in the artery feeding that part of the heart. And there's been an inflammatory process going on for some period of time where the immune system is collecting garbage that shouldn't be there or is there in excess, and it's trying to wall it off. But it will rupture when you have a heart attack. That artery ruptures, and your body views that as a bleed. And it is. It's a bleed, but it's a bleed inside of the artery. And so it forms a blood clot. And that blood clot will then form to keep the offending damage from getting anywhere and to starve it from getting nutrition. Unfortunately, it then also starves the part of the heart downstream from that. It's not the goal of the body to damage the heart. The goal is to damage the offending cause of this rupture. So that can happen for heart attacks. It can happen, the classic term is stroke, but it's not that's not a term I like. And so for your listeners who sometimes hear me use terms differently than other individuals, just for clarification, it's a cerebral, that means your brain, vascular, blood vessel, an accident. The reason why I don't like stroke is because before I got into medical college, I worked in a hospital as an orderly, and I worked in the quote stroke rehab unit. The term stroke is pretty archaic. It means God did not like you, so he struck you down. Now, independent upon people's religious beliefs, I would never agree to any intelligent form of life, whether it's just more intelligent than us or a creator or whatever you want to call, as being that nasty, that vindictive. So I just don't buy into that, and that's one of my I presume some people think of it as petty differences in terminologies, but that's why I don't use that term. I don't buy into that concept. And so a cerebral vascular accident is when that blood occlusion has occurred for 72 hours or more, and there's permanent damage then to the brain. If it occurs for less than 24 hours, we call it a transient ischemic, so a temporary loss of blood flow attack, what a lot of people call, quote, mini strokes. And you should ask the question, well, if 72 hours or more is a CVA and a TIA is 24 hours or less, is there something between? And there is. It's called a reversible ischemic neurologic deficit, or RIND. That means it lasted more than 24 hours, but it stopped within 72. So that was a long answer, probably to what you wanted.
Yeah, no, it was a
but
good one.
but the goal, the reason why I put this effort forward, and the reason why I'm an academic cardiologist, is because I not only am take care of patients as an academic cardiologist, but it's my job to teach so that patients learn, viewers learn, young physicians learn, and my goal, my hope, is that as a result, they will do a better job of taking care of people versus just kind of winging it. Because I think as a physician, all of us have the obligation to take very seriously what you're telling us when you come in to see us, and to not guess. Sometimes, push come to shove, occasionally everybody has to guess at something, but you're supposed to guess with the best knowledge, information you have. And since even with the inflammothrombotic response theory, that didn't completely include everything, all answers. It's, for me, a stepping stone. So I always refer to it as a theory, because since it's mine, I will only refer to it as a theory. What everybody else wants to refer to it is up to them. But it is a stepping stone forward, but it is certainly not the end-all explanation of everything. I just haven't quite wrapped my brain around everything yet, but I'm working on it.
Okay. So just a quick follow-up question to that before we go on to the next question. How come we're not hearing more about RIND? That's the first time I've heard that term between a TIA and an actual stroke in the hour measurement.
I really can't tell you why other people don't talk about different things, or they use incorrect terms. Sometimes I hear people say, well, it's just too complicated for patients. Well, okay, that took us a few minutes to do, but it was important, because a reversible ischemic neurologic deficit, and RIND, means exactly what it says. The harm that was done has been undone. And that should be promising, because it means now you have an opportunity to prevent permanent damage to the brain by looking at why it happened to begin with and addressing it and doing something about it. TIAs, or mini strokes, as people like to call them. Another thing you don't hear typically is, what does that mean? Well, 1/3 of the time, if you had a TIA, you're going to have another one. And how many times have you heard people say, well, we just had a mini stroke, it's okay? No, 1/3 of the time, you're going to have another TIA, which means every time you have one, you have a 1/3 chance of having another one, right?
Wow.
1/3 of the time, nothing else will happen to you. And 1/3 of the time, you will go ahead and have a full-blown CVA, which means you're going to have permanent damage. Now, my sister, when I was a senior medical student, was in a motorcycle accident. and she should have died. And I constantly have to remind her she's still alive today. She had a midbrain bleed in her thalamus, and she should have died. Most of those people die instantaneously, and 99% of those who didn't die instantaneously die in the next day. And of those that are still alive, 99% in the next week. And if you're that minuscule amount that survives after a week, you're probably going to survive. But I have to keep reminding her, even though she's lost most of the use of the right side of her body, that it's permanent. It is permanent. It lasted more than 72 hours. Most of the benefit that you recover is going to happen within the first week. And if you haven't done it by then, you probably are not going to get that back. And the reason for that is that for your cells in your brain, or if you've had a myocardial infarction, the cells in your heart, to repair themselves, they have to regenerate. And your body doesn't like empty spaces inside because that causes tears and ruptures. So you have something known as fibroblasts, which are part of this inflammothrombotic response. Those cells go into that damaged area and form a scar to keep that tissue from tearing open further. Well, once that scar is formed, and it takes a week for a scar to form fully, and then another 5 weeks, so a total of 6 weeks time to remove all the extra water, if you will, out of the areas so to form the toughest scar it's going to be. Once that week has happened, you can't grow through that. It's a barrier. So you could recover cells potentially if we prevented that, but it would be at the risk of the body protecting you from potentially dying, right? So the damage becomes permanent because of that inflammothrombotic response and scar tissue.
That was a really good way to explain it. So today I want to talk with you about nitric oxide and some of the supplements that are out there.
Nitric oxide.
Nitric oxide. Did it
Nitrous
come across?
oxide is
Oh no,
laughing
it
gas.
came across wrong. I did say nitric, but I don't know. I was probably
Okay.
looking down and reading it. It seems to be all of the rage right now to push the nitric oxide levels up. But from my understanding, and actually, I did a deep dive in your inflammothrombotic response and what you developed, especially in the nitric oxide pathways. So, but from my understanding on the research that I did and how I'm personally using it myself, is that it's better to increase your NO from foods that could be the precursors or supplements that could be the precursors, such as L-arginine or L-citrulline. But let me ask you, Dr. Fleming, can you explain what nitric oxide is to our listeners?
Right. Well, there's a field of chemistry known as oxidative reduction, or redox is the way that so capital R, capital E, capital D, capital O, capital X. So reduction and oxidation. And that simply has to do with the move of electrons, which is not where most people feel comfortable playing, because most people don't really understand electrons and they don't think about it on a day in, day out basis. And I will tell you, as a physicist, I think of electrons as different from what you've probably heard electrons are. So you probably don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole with me. But the oxidation reduction pathway is the movement of electrons. And when that happens, if something is oxidized, it tends to be damaging to the body. And if something is reduced, it tends to be healthier in the human body. So an example that we've talked about in the past is you take an apple, you slice through it, you leave it exposed to oxygen in the room air, and it becomes oxidized. And the reason for that is that the oxygen molecule, which is two oxygens put together, can come apart. And when it does that, the oxygen atom is oxidized, which is kind of where they came up with that terminology. And when it then interacts with the apple, it turns it brown. You see that discoloration. That's oxidation. So if you can think of that same process occurring inside of your body, that's what oxidation is. It's damaging to the tissue, whatever that tissue in your body is. So we don't want things to be oxidized, even though we need oxygen. And when we breathe oxygen, as I said, it's O2. So it's useful for us. But oxidation, when those oxygen atoms are pulled apart, becomes damaging and harmful. And your body reacts to that and says, wait a minute, that's harmful. I'm going to have an inflammothrombotic response to engulf it. But it is, as you can imagine, very damaging. So if you've ever seen hydrogen peroxide and you've left it out and you see it bubbling, that is the process of these oxygen atoms and molecules getting out, and you see the bubbling of the gas. But that's when the gas forms, when the two oxygens come together. But imagine that you've got tissue around there instead of just the atmosphere, the air. Now a free oxygen, a free radical, can damage whatever it comes into contact with. And it can do that to DNA. It can do that to the organs inside of cells. It can do that to the cell membrane. It can cause damage to anything it comes in contact with. So obviously, for our body to respond to that, it would be useful if we had pathways, chemical pathways within the cells of our body to deal with this damage so the oxidation doesn't damage our body. And nitric oxide happens to be the main mechanism for doing that. The issue is getting the cells of your body that make up the tissue to be able to make the nitric oxide to protect the cells from damage. Well, you can't give it to them directly, and this is part of the issue with people who market. We have nitric oxide in our preparation. And you and I have had a chance to talk about the work that we did when I was a cardiology fellow with vitamin E and with fish oils, and how every time we tried to do this, just exposing it to the oxygen, just like exposing the apple to the oxygen, caused damage. And so the vast majority of these things, when you eat them, are being damaged from the oxygen that they're exposed to. Or they were damaged as they were being made and put into a pretty pill that, let's be honest, people don't like it when Big Pharma makes the pretty pill, but frankly, it's the same group of people that are making the pretty tablets that you're ingesting that they say, yeah, I'm selling you a product. Well, somebody didn't wave a wand over that product and suddenly it appeared. It was being made by the same processes that Big Pharma uses. So it's the same thing. It's not like your body's ingesting something good for it, getting to your cells with L-arginine, for example, or citrulline or any of a number, and then your cells going, oh, look, we have the building blocks to make nitric oxide. Let's make nitric oxide. And that's the fallacy of many of the products is that they haven't accounted or explained how they magically get past their product being damaged into your cells where it can have healthy benefits for you. So like so many things, once you start messing around with it, it changes it and it's not as healthy for you.
Okay, so
There we go.
that makes sense then. Total sense. Okay, so how does nitrate differ from nitric oxide?
So nitrates, they're both of them have a nitrogen molecule. That's why they get the term nitrate. And the structure, organic chemistry is a study of carbon atoms, and so nitric oxide and nitrate have to do with nitrogen and carbon and oxygen, and it's just a matter of how many different atoms you have together as to what type of final finished product you have. Nitrates completely different set of atoms that don't break down to be involved in an oxidative reduction pathway, but they're frequently used for preserving foods, right? And one of the things we know about nitrates and nitrites, as they're used in basically meat production and a variety of other things, is that if you look at the data that's analyzed, these are usually the things that cause cancer. So the arrangement of those atoms that make nitrates and nitrites versus nitric oxide end up with completely different outcomes just depending upon which atoms you have attached to which ones. And so just because they all have a nitrogen atom in them doesn't mean, or an oxygen atom, doesn't mean that they're going to end up with the same outcome. There's other things in nitrates and nitrites. Everything we've got biochemically is only made up of those elements that you see on the periodic chart, the thing that everybody saw in high school that nobody wants to remember. But there's only so many atoms there, and you can only put them in so many combinations. And interestingly enough, those different combinations have, glyphosate, for example, right, has phosphate, potassium, oxygen in it, but the consequences of putting that glucose, the glyco, and the phosphates together in the combination that product is made takes the same things that could be potentially beneficial for someone and makes it extremely toxic if taken into the human body. So again, just seeing that they're made out of carbon and hydrogen and potassium and oxygen molecules, or atoms rather, to make the molecule. Different molecules have different significant effects.
Okay. Makes total sense. Thank you. So can you explain the pathway that nitric oxide takes in the body? You also talked about that at the VCICI, the vitamin C conference with Leora Piercy. You talked about the NO pathway.
So are you referring to the dopamine processing that we talked about on the one slide, or the L-DOPA, or any of a number of these pathways can be involved with the exchange of oxygen and oxidative free radicals, and are important in the production of any of a number of chemicals. One of those has to do with the production of what's typically referred to as stress hormones, norepinephrine and epinephrine and dopamine, right? And there's certain enzymes that help transfer that oxidative challenge to make these compounds that are necessary, but as a result, you can have a lot of oxidative stress in the production of these necessary hormones or chemicals that are required to maintain your heartbeat and your blood pressure and respond to stress and in fact help run the immune system. All of them follow the same fundamental principle, which is either releasing a hydrogen atom, which is a positive, reduced, or oxygen, which is negative, oxidized in the process. And depending upon which pathway those are in, you'll generate different effects. But the one that I think you're referring to with the VCICI conference was the importance of generating dopamine out of that pathway.
Yes.
Right. In that upper left-hand corner of that slide that I've referred to. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So could taking supplements then that contain higher amounts of these amino acids, beetroot extract, and sometimes when you take a look at these labels, it's really hard to see the differences in like the milligram, the microgram, the grams, because they're proprietary blend to some of these supplements. But could taking something like that do more harm than good? Because I think you just explained in the whole free radical scenario that nitric oxide could be a free radical and it could lead to cell and tissue damage when taken in excess.
Yeah, that's kind of the underlying theme of what's called referred to as homeostasis, this fine balance. And I think that way too often the mentality is more is better. I mean, the old classic example that we used to use when I was a medical student was, it says, if you look at an aspirin bottle, it says take 1 or 2 as needed. Now, I don't know anybody other than possibly myself, and it's been such a long time since I've taken an aspirin, reflecting back on it. But, everybody starts with 2, it seems. Nobody takes 1. And
Right.
we used to have the standing joke of people, which is, yeah, they take in like 10 or 12 in a day, because golly, if 2 are good, well, 4 must be better, But the problem is that anything you put into your body has a consequence. So, for aspirin, since I got down that track, when people go to donate blood, one of the questions that are asked are, do you take aspirin? And the reason for that is that aspirin interferes with the platelets, part of your blood clotting, and they interfere with the release of something called thromboxane A2. And again, I don't expect people to memorize this, but everybody's smart enough to be told the terms, right? And you can write it down, you can go look it up if you want to, or not look it up, but you're smart enough to hear the terms. And I'm tired of doctors and everybody else playing everybody down as so stupid that, well, we're not going to put them through that. Well, it's our obligation to teach if we're going to teach and to do it right. So it interferes with thromboxane A2, which means your blood won't clot as well. So imagine you take 2. Well, if you take 4, it's going to have even more effect on your platelets. So you can end up with a bleeding problem instead of a clotting problem. Anything you put into your body, the question is balance. Too much causes one type of problem, too little causes another type of problem. And that's the caveat here, let the buyer beware sometimes, I think, is recognizing the importance of helping to nudge a system to be healthier versus causing the system to react and have the exact opposite effect. We used to, so Herudin snake, a leech venom, is something that when I was a cardiology fellow, we used to try to see if that would reduce the damage caused from the blood clotting causing myocardial infarction, right? And so we would literally go in with forceps after we'd taken the patient to the cath lab, and we'd angioplasty their blood vessel and try to open up blood clots, or suctioned out the blood clots with atherectomies, or inserted drugs to try to break down the clot called thrombolytics. And then we would watch them in the coronary care unit. And one of the studies we did is we put Herudin, we put leeches on their hands and their arms. So the leech would release Herudin, was the name of it, the drug, the chemical. And I remember, that was supposed to be helpful. But I remember coming back to see my first patient after we had done that. It was this man, and he looked like somebody had taken a machete to his face. And, I was shocked. I said, well, what happened to my patient? What did you do to him over the night? And they said, well, nothing. He wanted to shave, so we gave him a razor.
Oh my gosh.
And the problem is that it had so prevented the blood clotting that any nicks from the razor caused him to bleed from his face. And it looked like somebody had taken a machete to his face. And our joke so if you're not used to medical humor, folks, I'm not going to apologize for it, because we live in a world, physicians live in a different world, the nurses live in a different world. If you work around patients, it's a different world. our joke used to be, Mrs. Jones, good news, your husband didn't die from his myocardial infarction. Bad news, he died from hemorrhaging, bleeding because of the leeches that we put in, right? Okay. So that became a protocol then. You don't get to shave. If we've got you on Haruden, you don't get to shave. You may not like it. Doesn't matter. I'm not going to have you bleeding to death because you took a razor to your face and now look like a machete. So anything that goes into your body can have an adverse effect. And when you overwhelm your body, this inflammatory thrombotic response, by the way, is your body's effort to keep you in balance. And if you perturb it, it will let you know. And you saw at the VCI-CI conference and the Bandera conference and on FlemingMethod.com, that 3-part lecture series that I have with something like 500 slides, you can see instances of one extreme causes blood clotting, causes myocardial infarctions, CVAs, miscarriages, high blood pressure, diabetes. On the other end, you see improved blood flow and decreased clotting, and you get cancers, right? Same spectrum. It's just a matter of which direction you get perturbed on or pushed. And when you start adding more into your diet from these products and you exceed certain issues, you're going to have problems. The vitamins and minerals are a classic example as well. Vitamin A, K, E, and D. So very simple, fat soluble. The fat soluble are A, K, E, and D. So you can spell it out, FAKED, faked. We know from decades of research that you can get too much vitamin A. You can have visual problems. Vitamin K, you can have clotting problems. Vitamin E, not so much that it's obvious that we know. In vitamin D, other health problems, bone problems, kidney stone problems, nephrolithiasis for the people who want the medical term. And that was because those vitamins can be stored in fat and they don't get dumped out of the body. All the other vitamins are water soluble. And so your kidneys will say, okay, that's more than we need. We just dump it out in the urine. And so when people go buying very expensive vitamin and mineral supplements, the ongoing joke in medicine is they just bought very expensive urine. They're just urinating it out almost as fast as it's taking it in.
Okay. All right. Did they use leeches back in the day when somebody had like gout, maybe from drinking too much alcohol or something? They used leeches.
So I know that there's certain types of alcohol. What is it? Tequila, where there's
the worms in the tequila.
But I don't know I'm not familiar with anything where they use leeches with gout. And I would argue that they probably didn't get any benefit, except that people probably bled to death because uric acid, which is what gout crystals are, wouldn't be affected by Haruden. But, it doesn't mean somebody didn't do it. Look, there's a lot of stupid things that have been done. I mean, we were in the 1960s, it was known that too little thyroid hormone would result in your cholesterol levels going up. And they did research where they took people with normal thyroid glands and they gave them extra thyroid. And that increased their heart rates and caused myocardial infarctions and cerebrovascular accidents. And they cut that study, fortunately, relatively soon after they started killing people. Not a well thought out study, but excess thyroid hormone being given to people who already had a normal amount of thyroid hormone, whose entire endocrine system was in balance, got thrown way out of whack and ended up killing people. So, you can't fix stupid, right? And that's been one of my recurrent themes as we've talked about SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19 and the genetic vaccines, which is, as we've talked about before, I'm not anti-vaccine. I'm just anti-stupid. And the research that was done, or the absence of research that was done on these genetic vaccines, speaks to the harm that we're seeing, which is an inflammatory thrombotic response and a pyogenic response causing Alzheimer's and amyloidosis of the heart and diabetes mellitus when it hits the brain, the heart, and the pancreas, respectively.
Okay. All right. So this next question has to do with a couple of things, and I would love your opinion on this. So for the exercise enthusiasts who maybe were misinformed about taking the COVID shot, or some of the pilots who were kind of mandated into taking the COVID shot, what would your recommendation be if somebody is having some heart issues? What would your recommendation? Would it be to go down the cofactors, the foods, in order to have your body produce its own nitric oxide? Or would you recommend one of the supplements that have all of these amino acids? I see that beetroot juice or beetroot extract. I mean, for me, when I'm working with clients, especially with clients with kidney stones, I usually have them follow like a low oxalate diet. We know that beets are high and spinach is high in oxalates. What would your opinion be, and what recommendation could you make to some of these exercise enthusiasts, these pro soccer players, these baseball players, the pilots that were harmed, or even for somebody like me? I did not have the shot. I'm very open about that, but maybe I need to consider, something that would help my nitric oxide level.
Well, to begin with, the first thought in my process is always diagnostics, sorting out, do you have a problem and why do you have a problem? That's critical. We've had a lot of people that have talked about individuals getting vaccinated and then having a health consequence as a result of it. And you saw at the VCICI conference and on FlemingMethod.com, again, those 3 lectures and what I did at Bandera for the one group, an explanation of why the sudden cardiac death occurs in people who've been vaccinated with these vaccines. And it has to do with a couple of decades worth of research where it was known that it altered the flow of potassium channels, that anytime you increase the heart rate, increase the risk of those potassium channels having problems producing these very bad dysrhythmias of the heart. They're not arrhythmias. Going to one of my points for clarification, A means absence of something. So arrhythmia means the absence of a rhythm. There's only one. That's asystole. It means you're already dead. Dysrhythmia means an abnormal rhythm, and that's typically what then kills people, these bad rhythms that we're seeing. And so one of the questions is the diagnostics. Why do you think you have a heart problem? And there's different things to consider. One is the effect on the potassium channels, and that you can determine somewhat briefly by just getting an electrocardiogram. You can do some initial measurements, although if you really wanted to know whether increasing your heart rate produced a problem, you would then have a Holter monitor put on somebody, which monitors your rhythm for 24 hours, or you could use an event monitor, which has a memory loop in it that if you have an event that happens, you click the button and it keeps that memory from about 30 seconds before for another 30 seconds after. And that allows physicians like myself, cardiologists like myself, to look at those rhythms and see, okay, this is when you said you had your symptom. What rhythm are you having? So that's one of the first things. The other one is that many of these heart disease problems are actually cryogenic. They're abnormal proteins. To actually sort that through, a physical exam isn't going to do that. You need something that can image. Echocardiography can get an impression. It can see what's known as speckling. It looks like, stars. bright little speckled pattern to the heart muscle, but it's not diagnostic. It doesn't tell you that's what it's due to. It says, okay, here's some things that could be going on. You actually have to do nuclear imaging of the heart to find the pyogenic amyloid heart disease. And anybody who tells you they can find out by doing some other test is either ill-informed or selling you something, and doesn't matter which one it is, it's bad form either way. So you want to know what your problem is, because if you don't know what your problem is, you're shooting in the dark and you're guessing. And from my perspective as both a scientist and a physician, and I guess attorney, I'll throw it in there, that's a bad move. That's not how you take care of people. For people in general, you can't run a nuclear image on yourself or an electrocardiogram, so you're not going to be able to do that. But it's always better to know why. I mean, I'm not sure why we think that it's okay to take poorer care of ourselves than our vehicles. If you have a vehicle that is not running right and it makes a bad sound, most people don't then go try to fix it on their own.
Right.
They take it to a mechanic.
Right.
So why do we think more of our vehicles than we do of ourselves? And I know the arguments about all the different qualities of medical physicians out there. Okay, I'm familiar with that. I'm just not going to give anybody any leeway on that. The medical physicians are supposed to be taking care of this. If they're not, that's on them. But that's on them. And there will be a day that they and I will be addressing each other. And I'm not going to be the one uncomfortable in the room. So that's that issue. The issue about what you take. The work that I've done, and I shared with you something that I call Dragon Glass, and I give you permission to share that with people. Okay, I could have sat down and I had people trying to say, Fleming, all this stuff that you've done research on, that you've done the diagnostics, that you've demonstrated a benefit. You can make a small fortune here, if we just put it together and sold it, right? Well, I never did that. I just felt uncomfortable doing that. And B, in 2023, I feel even more uncomfortable doing that because there are so many people that are making everyone afraid that they're going to die or they're going to have a health problem. But if you just go buy our product, well, you're going to be all right. Because we live in a world like that, I can't, in good faith, even if I could become wealthy for doing it, or maybe I should say particularly because I could become wealthy for doing it, I can't do that. I can't sell it. I can't. So give it to the people. Just Laurie, give it to the people. All right. Okay. I sleep well at night because I know that I've not compromised myself anywhere along the way. Doesn't mean I am loved as much as other people are, but I sleep comfortably. And as far as I'm concerned, the most important reasons for why I behave the way I do, I'm satisfied with what that outcome is going to be. And I contrast that to the fact that these other people that have their supplements out there haven't done anything to quantify or measure the outcome. They're just talking about, well, we know that nitrous oxide is useful for this, that, or the other thing, so come on and take it. Or we know, I'm not going to go into the other examples that I think of because then it just sounds like I'm harping on different people.
Well, you have a good point on just what you said. So let me follow up with this question that's supposed to be towards the last. So do you feel, in your opinion, that before someone were to start a nitric oxide supplement, that there should be some testing, like me, and I know that you and I talk about testing C-reactive protein, homocysteine, lipo little a,
Lipoprotein little a.
fibrinogen, cholesterol panels. Do you think that in someone that has already, like they have some heart damage, do you think that they should get tested, do these tests first before they're browsing the internet and they stumble upon one of these miracle nitric oxide supplements that are being marketed? Do you think that they should see their doctor, their heart doctor, even like looking at something like My Labs for Life, or you don't need a doctor and you can go run your, do your own test? Would you, in your opinion, recommend that be done prior?
Right. So my comment to anybody on testing is the only reason to do a test is if it's going to make a difference in what you're going to do as a result of the outcome of the test. If you're doing a test just to do a test, that's stupid.
Well, okay. Yeah, like a vitamin D test, which you really want to know what your vitamin D levels are.
Your question needs to be, if I'm going to do a test, will it make a difference in what I do? And I don't care whether that's the lay public or a physician doing that test. It needs to be an important pivotal point at which it's going to change what you're going to do, right? And I've had this with people in the past that have wanted nuclear imaging looking for heart disease, telling me that if they have heart disease, they're going to change their diet and lifestyle. But if they don't have heart disease, they're going to continue to do the same thing. I go, wow. So it's a problem, but you're going to, so if we don't see heart disease, you're going to continue to do the same thing that, that's going to produce heart disease until you get heart disease. It's, it's almost like this is a lottery for them. So that's the function of testing. I don't recommend any supplements that say they have nitric oxide in them because, as I said before, if you take it, it's going to get oxidized. It will not have the effects. So you're looking for the precursors, which I've already talked about, the L-arginine, this. And by the way, every one of these, if you notice the term L in there, everything that exists organically comes in two flavors, if you will, okay? If you essentially put an energy source through them, so light, okay, fluorescence or fluoroscopy or whatever you're doing, half of what you've got will spin it to the right. That's called dextrose, right, dextrose.
Right. Correct.
And half of it will spin it to the left, levo, left. All of the amino acids that work in the human body or any organic is L. So that's where you see L. So they make the product, the D will do nothing for you. So if you see a product that has D, this, that, and the other thing, run from that. Okay, it will have no benefit. L would be the ones that work. However, you want to make sure that you're only taking supplements that have what I would call essential amino acids. They're called essential because you don't make them in your body. You must get them from the world, from your environment, from your food, from your supplement. Now, I always encourage people to get it from their food first, but if you're going to get it, don't exceed the recommended amount and make sure it's an essential amino acid, because consuming one that you're already going to make from the food, from the protein that you eat, whatever that protein source is worthless. Okay. So, and again, one of the reasons for telling you can release it out there is for people to go find their own mix of things and use that. I know the research I've done, but I'm not covering the research tales of people that just said, well, we know these drugs are supposed to be good for you, so we're going to put a product together, give it a cutesy name that sounds like it's Miracle 101. And people will buy it and go, well, this must be good for your heart because it says cardio, or it must be good for your liver because it says hepato, or it must be good for your brain because it says cerebro. And now I'm just thinking about X-Men. a word to the wise. Just because somebody wants to sell you something doesn't mean you should buy it. You can buy the same vitamins and minerals and amino acids from any source you want to buy them from. Buying them from website A versus website B, just because website A has a nice, pretty name to it that gives hope and promise, which I think is a bad thing to do when you haven't done the research to prove it. I think giving false hope and promise to people is a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
So you make some choices. Everybody out there is intelligent enough to, if they can't do it, to find someone who will help them find the sources. And I used to tell this to people that I would put on the folate, vitamin B6 and B12 supplements because they had elevated homocysteine, and I would give them samples. That's what I would do when Big Pharma would come in. I would collect them all, and then when people needed something, I would go, well, here, Mrs. Jones, you're 60 some years old, you're 80 some years old. I don't see you as needing to go pay money to the pharmacist to get this drug. Here's some samples that they provided me. Have at it, right? Because I'm not going to use them, but you can use them. So, but by the same token, instead of getting that drug company to do it, you can buy that same stuff over, at any of a number of pharmacies or online. It's the same stuff. It doesn't work better because website A has a cutesy name that makes it sound like this is the miracle cure I'm going for.
And then I would think that knowing the strength, milligram, microgram, whatever grams, would be
Right.
important for somebody taking like an all-in-one supplement.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, again, you don't want to overdose on the fat soluble vitamins for you.
I heard that. You said vitamins.
Well, when I look at you, I'm half the time thinking, how is she going to pronounce it this time? The only reason why vital amines or vitamins are useful is because they help with pathways that you need help with to make them more efficient and more successful so that you generate more of the downstream product. And that's why you use them, because you want the downstream product. But that reiterates the importance of recognizing that you can't take a lot of things into your body like nitrous oxide or vitamin E or fish oils because they are oxidized in the air and they don't work. I mean, again, one of the projects that we did when I was a senior fellow, cardiology fellow, is we were looking at people, we were trying to open their arteries, and we gave them 15 to 20 grams of fish oil. So it was so bad that, when you walked down the hallway, you knew you were approaching the room because it smelled like the river. And we had to pair up patients together because other patients that weren't part of that research did not want to be in that room with those patients. And what we discovered was that even though it was thought that the fish oils would be beneficial, that was the theory. In reality, all those fish oils oxidized because of how they were processed. So we were giving them oxidized fish oil, which didn't work. And in the end, that's what we saw. It had no effect. But it wasn't until we looked at it and said, well, why the heck is it not working when we're doing this research? But supposedly it works. And that leads, typically the results of research that you think are unsuccessful are really the most successful pieces of information. If you would just step back and go, what's the data trying to teach me? Instead of coming up with the conclusion you want, what's the data trying to teach me? And one of the lessons is that just because you're putting stuff into your body doesn't mean it's going to help you.
Well, I like that. And then I cut up an apple 5 minutes ago. You can see where it's turning brown. So
Yes.
that's what Dr. Fleming is talking about, oxidizing.
Oxidative stress is like cellular rust in the body. Think of cutting an apple in half, and as it sits on the counter, it begins to turn brown due to being exposed to oxygen. So if nitric oxide was exposed to oxygen, it would create oxidative stress.
So Dr. Fleming, how can some of these pilots, how could they find you to look for some help in what their struggles may be? Where can we get a hold of you at?
Uh, so, I mean, there's a lot of information on FlemingMethod.com
Yes.
as far as the data that's there. As far as personally getting a hold of me, no.
Oh, that's what I meant.
Right, right.
We don't
So
want
Fleming,
anybody stalking you.
not that I don't have that happening already. So FlemingMethod.com is a good place to go to that. Go to the left-hand column and then just do a drop down and you'll see inflammothrombotic response. You'll see SARS-CoV-2 and you just scroll down through that. You'll see different recommendations based upon the research we did. You'll see recommendations, proposals for spike protein and genetic vaccine injury, because again, what's being shed, there's not good data from person to person. So we know that things are being spread. Federal government's admitted that. They have reports that they've generated. I've talked about that. But we know that what's being spread are the viruses, the spike proteins, the genetic vaccines, the furin, all of the above, but to various degrees in different individuals. So there's not a one size fits all. And by the way, that's why you go to see the doctor. If one size fit all, if cookie cutter is what you want, well, cookie cutter is what everybody's been getting for the last 4 years. And I would argue not as successful as baking, in the restaurant industry, where cookie cutter might be okay if you're making food, but maybe not so good if you're actually trying to take care of people, because everybody has these different nuances in what they've been exposed to and how their body's reacting and how much inflammothrombotic response they're generating. And you have to look at each individual, which is the goal of FMTVDM or Fleming method, which is we can measure what's happening in your body. We can give you a treatment. We can then remeasure and determine if that treatment worked for that problem for you. Because as altruistic as you might be, and you might care about whether it helps the next 20 people down the line, what you really care about is whether it helps you. So that's one of the reasons why I'm so focused on measuring. Objective measurement. You don't need opinions. You don't need websites giving you opinions. You don't need doctors or scientists or attorneys or politicians or
Dr.
journalists.
Google.
Yeah, I mean, again, there's all these cute little people that are out there. And again, I would argue that their Google degree does not match my PhD, MD, JD. Doesn't match my master's, doesn't match my bachelor's degrees. It doesn't match anything, and frankly, I would say that Dr. Google would have learned an awful lot from my parents when they were alive, because they were smarter than Dr. Google.
Agreed on that. Well, Dr. Fleming, I appreciate your time. I just want to put out there that we here in Utah are going to be hosting the Health and Wellness show. It's called MainStreetMediaUtah.com. It's the right side of NPR, and we're hoping to get more truth with Dr. Fleming out there, because I really feel that people are truly struggling with where to go to find the truth right now. And we're hoping to educate more and more people, and that word spreads. So we'll be saving this podcast here for a future show on MainStreetMediaUtah.com. And Dr. Fleming, I really appreciate your time today. So thank you so much. And I look forward to our next interview. Have a
My
great
pleasure.
day.
Thank you. You too.
Bye. Ciao.
Bye.
Bring them fields of green and gold, let their laughter echo clear. In a world so tightly wound, where can our children play? bring them fields of green and gold. Let their laughter echo clear in a world so tightly wound. Where can our children play?